Pokemon Go is hyping up their next competitive season on Twitter by posting silhouettes of the Gen 9 starters. So in this video, I'm going to let you know just how good the Paldean starters, the Gen 9 starters, are in Pokemon Go, in both raids and in PvP. Look at that duck dance. Damn. Starting out with Weedcat's evolution, Magical Weedcat, aka Meowscarada. Yeah, solid dark grass dual type Pokemon, much like the Shiftry, and very attack weighted and kind of glassy, also like the Shiftry. And when it comes to the attack stat as a grass type Pokemon, 233 is pretty respectable for raids. And swapping on over to the DPS TDO spreadsheet here on GamePress, you can see that Meowscarada is possibly the best non-shadow, non-mythical, non-ultra spacical grass type Pokemon. So yeah, we already do have a lot of seemingly better grass-type Pokemon, but Meowscarada is one of the better ones with the Frenzy Plant here. Now this is with Frenzy Plant, so without Frenzy Plant, it'd probably be a little bit behind the Rillaboom with the Grass Knot, if it were to get Grass Knot, for example. Rillaboom has... I can't say Rillaboom, I want to put an L. Rillaboom has a 239 attack stat, so technically Rillaboom will always be slightly better than Meowscarada, and Rillaboom will get the Frenzy Plant before Meowscarada does. So for a budget option, Rillaboom's kind of got the advantage here as a starter Pokemon. But you know, that's only 3, and it does have a different subtyping, being a dark grass Pokemon. So, you know, Magic Weedcat kind of has it going on for raids a little bit. But once again, we do got, you know, outer space, mega, mythical options, shadow options already happening. So if you're already fortified for your grass type raids, well, Meowscarada isn't exactly the hottest thing on the block. Moving on to the PvP side of the forest, first and foremost, I want to make it clear that we don't have a moveset data mine on these Pokemon yet. So if the data mine comes out and their movesets are significantly worse or even slightly worse than what I'm suggesting here, well then I think you can imagine that they're going to be not that great. So assuming that they get halfway decent movesets, well, this is what we're looking at for Meowscarada. Since it is kind of like a magician here, I think Magical Leaf would be appropriate for it. And then Shadow Claw would be good too. I mean, obviously slapping Shadow Claw on anything will make it a lot better. And I mean, when your stat product's, you know, 1600, you kind of need all the help you can get, right? So compared to Shiftry, they are both Glass Cannon, Grass Dark type Pokemon. Meowscarada could stand out with this like mid-range Grass type attack, or it could possibly get the Shadow Claw for a more aggressive kind of farm down Pokemon compared to the slow snarls of the Shiftry. When it comes to the charge moves, Shiftry has Leaf Blade and Foul Play to work with. Meowscarada kind of mirrors that and inverts it a little bit with the early Night Slash and the later Grass Knot. I'd say overall Shiftry does have the move pool advantage in the charge moves here, but when it comes to like the tech charge move, Meowscarada could run the Leaf Storm, and it also has access to Acrobatics in the main series games. And Acrobatics is a lot more reasonable to access than the Hurricane, so that could be a way for Meowscarada to stand out. It being a grass dark Pokemon, dark type giving it resistances to, you know, ghost, dark, and psychic type attacks. If a fighting type or an opposing grass type comes its way, it could possibly acrobatics them down. Where with Shiftry, it's kind of a pointless Hail Mary. You might not even reach the Hurricane in those situations. So it could be interesting for the Meowscarada. But I would say overall, even with the most perfect moveset ever for Meowscarada, the meta's not looking too in favor of grass dark Pokemon that are glassy like this. I mean, Shiftry, I don't know when the last time was that I saw a Shiftry in either the Great League or the Ultra League. So Meowscarada might need a lot to stand out. And considering how Pokemon Go has been treating starter Pokemon on release, it probably might not happen for the Meowscarada, but we'll have to see. Next up, we got the Fire Ghost type Opera Singing Alligator Skeledirge. Skeledirge has a relatively low 207 attack stat and a pretty decent 232 stamina stat. So overall, this thing probably won't be all that great in raids, but could have an interesting spot in PvP. When it comes to the Fire Ghost type role, that does provide some pretty interesting and powerful resistances across all 3 metagames. But as it stands, all we really have is Alola Marowak, which can only work in the Great League, and the Chandelure, which can work, but doesn't work all that great, right? So this could make an interesting splash in PvP. Flipping on over to the DPS TDO spreadsheet, we're not seeing Skeledirge on page 1. We are not seeing Skeledirge on page 2. We are not seeing Skeledirge on page 3. But here it is on page 4 with Blast Burn. With Blast Burn, it is as good as a Fire Fang Flamethrower Arcanine. Yeah, that's what a 203 attack stat will do for you. Things are a little bit more interesting as a ghost type though. Here you can see that Skeledirge is making page 2 if it gets the wonderful Shadow Claw Shadow Ball moveset. That said, it is mostly rising up here with its TDO. It's basically a more useful metric for tankiness here. Its DPS is a little bit on the soft side. So when you got the option of running, I don't know, all the other ghost type Pokemon that you have been using that have way more DPS, Skeledirge is an interesting option. Not a bad option, but definitely not one of the strongest options out there. Oh yeah, and if you're curious about Meowscarada with ghost type attacks, it's Haunter tier, kind of worse because it's got less DPS. So we already knew Skeledirge wasn't going to do a whole lot in raids, right? But in PvP, where that wonderful stamina can shine, well, how does it compare? Well, comparing it side by side to the Alola Marowak, you can see that it does have the lower stat product. That said, it does have a higher stamina stat, and we are trying to play up these unique resistances. So overall, it kind of balances out a little bit. On top of that, Skeledirge does have potential to dominate Alola Marowak in the move pool department. Fire Spin and Hex aren't exactly the greatest fast moves. They're like very okay fast moves. Shadow Bone's pretty good, but it's only slightly better than the Shadow Ball, and Bone Club is just bad. Like, I mean, yeah, sure, you could maybe like Bone Club down, what's it called? Bastiodon, right? But realistically, Bone Club is just a bait move, and given the energy cost of Shadow Bone, it's like not even that great of a bait move. So yeah, overall, the whole moveset situation with Alola Marowak is just kind of awkward. So this is where Skeledirge can come in and take an advantage if it were to get better fast moves such as Incinerate or the Shadow Claw. It might not get the Shadow Claw. It might not get the Incinerate, right? So if it doesn't get those for fast moves, I think Skeledirge might not be at least that impactful in the Great League, but it could still have some potential in the Ultra League where it doesn't have ghost and fire type competition like it does in the Great League here. For the charge move department, I think this is where things get really interesting for Skeledirge. We got Flame Charge, which is always fun, and Shadow Ball, which is always powerful, but it could also learn Disarming Voice. Now, this is the like opera singing gator Pokemon, so it having a sonic attack with Disarming Voice, that kind of makes sense thematically. So we're not exactly reaching on this one. And if it were to have that fairy type coverage, that could give it a good option against dark type Pokemon that could come in and try to counter it. Or at least it would give it a spicy option to stand out a little bit compared to the Alola Marowak, aside from just what the fast move is. An example of how this could work out pretty well for Skeledirge is in the Ultra League, where the Greninja has kind of popped off and taken over a little bit. Yeah, ignoring the fact that my hacked PV Poke doesn't have Water Shuriken or Hydro Cannon on this thing quite yet, you can see that the Disarming Voice here does about 58% of Greninja's HP. So if you were to get a positive matchup with the Skeledirge, maybe against like a fairy or fighting type Pokemon, farm up a bit, go up against the Greninja, well now you can put some serious pressure on it where, Charizard just has the Blast Burn to work with and will very likely get farmed down because it is quite a fragile Pokemon. And then finally, I am pretty interested in seeing how Skeledirge does in the Master League Premier Cup, which has been kind of asking for a Fire-type Pokemon. Just using the Shadow Claw, Flame Charge, Shadow Ball moveset, you can see that it's getting 11 wins to 17 losses, so not exactly the best win-loss scenario, but given how condensed that meta is, I mean, if you're up against Steel and Fairy-type Pokemon, which make up a lot of team cores outright, that could give you a pretty solid advantage there. So I'd say when it comes to PvP, Skeledirge is the Pokemon I'm most excited for here because it has so much dynamic potential across all 3 leagues of PvP. That said, if it doesn't get the Shadow Claw, it gets the Incinerate instead, looks like in Master League at least it'll be doing a little bit better, so maybe it doesn't need the Shadow Claw to shine. Maybe just a simple Incinerate is all it takes, along with Shadow Ball, a simple Shadow Ball and Incinerate, and hopefully a Disarming Voice, If it gets the fun toolkit, I think Skeledirge is going to do some fun things. So please, John Hankey, just this once, give us something nice. And then finally, we have Quaquaval. Quaquaval is a fighting water type Pokemon, much like the Poliwrath. And unlike Poliwrath, this thing is kind of a very top heavy glass cannon type Pokemon here. So it could work out well in the raid scene. And depending on the moveset of the Quaquaval, it could be pretty decent in PvP. Counter is on the table for this thing. Checking out Quaquaval in raids, you can see it's a pretty good option if it were to get Water Gun and when it finally gets the Hydro Cannon moveset, competing with some of the better Shadow Pokemon. Now, of course, Kyogre is Kyogre, and Kyogre is abundant, and we do have our Mega Pokemon to work with, and if you've already powered up some of your Shadow Pokemon, well, maybe Quaquaval isn't the coolest thing around, but Quaquaval is looking pretty good, making page 1 in the overall rating. And if you do sort this by DPS, you will see that the Greninja that we recently got is, slightly better than the Hydro Cannon Quaquaval, but it is only slightly better. And Quaquaval, in terms of DPS, it's only like 0.1 better. And it's got much more tankiness to work with too. So, when the time comes, Quaquaval could be pretty interesting. Then when it comes to being a fighting type Pokemon, I think Quaquaval has too much to work against. And from what I scanned, from what I can learn in the main series games, it doesn't learn any multi-bar fighting type charge moves that aren't bad. So it just has the close combat to work with here, which, single bar charge move versus multi-bar in an era where everybody already has like Machamp armies. Quaquaval probably won't stand out as a fighting type Pokemon, but it does look like a pretty good water type, at least for like 2026, whenever it gets that Hydro Cannon. Then when it comes to the PvP side of things, Quaquaval is looking kind of spooky. I mean, 1600 on the stat product here. Poliwrath being a pretty good analog to it, having nearly 2000 stat product, having the counter, and then having the nice, safe, dynamic punch and scald to work with, power up punch if you want to be kind of spicy, and then ice punch for that nice coverage. Quaquaval, I think it's going to have to play up the glass cannon side of things. So we do got the counter as an option. We also got close combat as an option with the same type attack bonus. And then Brave Bird and Acrobatics are also both on the table for Quaquaval in PvP. Is it going to get these moves? Reasonably it could, right? And if it does, then it could be a spicy option. But this very low stat product here, that doesn't really bode confidence. For example, Galarian Zapdos here is already doing a similar job to this, and Galarian Zapdos can be really effective in Great League PvP, but it's always been kind of a meme spice option. It really hasn't been this like big name in the Great League meta, and with the Carbonk being out there now, man, it's even harder for Zapdos to make its way in the world. So I guess Quaquaval could be like a Galarian Zapdos analog that has water type attacks to maybe deal with the Carbonk, but overall it's looking kind of sketchy. I think Quaquaval could be decent enough in PvP where you'd want to get one for like the Great League and the Ultra League, but how much you'd use it, I'm not sure. And if it doesn't get the counter, then I don't know, we're getting pretty suspicious then, even more suspicious than those toes. So that's about all I got to say right now for the Paldean starters in Pokemon Go. Overall, they all look pretty decent for raids, right? And they all look very interesting for PvP. But ultimately, it is going to come down to what those move pools are going to look like. So if you want to know how good they are when they finally do release and we get all the data mine info, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips and I'll let you know all about these starter Pokemon and all the other Paldean Pokemon that we learned about. And if you do got any questions on this content, comment below, let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these Patreon supporters. If you want to support Swagman on Patreon, link in the description. Where is Fuecoco? It has been an hour since the last update. Where is my Fuecoco silhouette? Where is my dancing little friend?